I remember the exact second when my brother's hands closed around my throat and the world tilted. His breath reeked of whiskey and stale cigarettes, his eyes blazing with greed, his voice roaring the words that would echo in my skull forever. The money is mine. The living room felt suddenly smaller, the air dense and poisonous as his fingers dug into my skin with brutal force. I had always known Thomas Carter could be cruel, but that night cruelty transformed into something primal, a violence sharpened by years of resentment and a mother's death that left behind more than grief. I was not ready for how quickly his rage became physical, how swiftly his shadow swallowed the room and left me gasping. My knees slammed into the hardwood floor as he shoved me backward, and the carpet beneath me scraped against my palms as I tried to push myself away. The veins in his neck bulged, his face twisted, and the weight of his body pinned me where I sat. My voice cracked into useless gasps as his thumbs pressed deeper, cutting off every attempt at breath. I kicked out the coffee table, rattling violently, a lamp crashing to the floor and scattering shards of glass across the rug. My chest burned with a desperate need for air, my vision narrowing until the edges dissolved into black. In the background, I saw Clara, his wife, standing with her phone raised, recording me like a grotesque spectacle. She smirked faintly, her eyes glinting with the kind of satisfaction only a coward feels when they see someone weaker being destroyed. I tried to plead with her silently, my gaze begging for even the smallest mercy, but she did not move. She did not speak. She only held that phone steady, capturing the collapse of my body as though it were entertainment for later. My throat screamed with pain even though no sound escaped. My nails clawed desperately at Thomas's arms, leaving red streaks that only fueled his fury. His voice thundered again above me, a guttural growl repeating the same words like a curse. "The money is mine." Each syllable landed heavier than his fists ever could, a declaration not only of his greed, but of his willingness to erase me completely to secure it. My lungs begged for air. My heart slammed violently against my ribs, and then stumbled into a terrifying rhythm, skipping beats and hammering wildly out of control. The copper taste of blood rose in my mouth as I bit down accidentally on my own tongue, and the sound of my strangled gagging filled my ears, muffled and distant, as if I were underwater. I felt the room tilt again, objects blurring colors draining my body, reduced to trembling limbs that no longer obeyed. Thomas's shadow loomed over me, immense and suffocating, and the pressure on my throat became the only reality left. Seconds stretched into lifetimes, every heartbeat louder and weaker than the last, until the truth settled inside me with horrifying clarity. I had stopped breathing. For a moment, silence swallowed everything. My body convulsed. My hands slipped from his arms, and my head fell backward against the carpet. My eyes fluttered, staring up at the cracked ceiling where dust floated in the light of the overhead lamp. And in that fragile instant, I wondered if this was the last thing I would ever see. My brother's face, red with rage, hovered above me, and his words blurred into a monstrous growl I could no longer fully hear. Clara laughed softly in the background, her phone tilting to capture my collapsing chest, my lips parting uselessly, the twitch of my hands fading. It was the soundless theater of death performed in my own childhood home, the very house where my mother had once tucked me in at night, the same walls now echoing with betrayal and violence. The carpet beneath me smelled faintly of dust and old whiskey spills, and as my body gave in, I felt an eerie stillness inside my chest. The frantic hammer of my heart stumbled one last time, then dropped into a void so empty, I thought it had ceased forever. In that darkness, fear became cold acceptance, a whisper that maybe Thomas had finally won that. Maybe my life was nothing more than an obstacle between him and the inheritance he craved. Yet even as consciousness slipped, some stubborn fragment of me clung to the edges, some silent vow forming that this would not be the way my story ended. But in that precise moment, to anyone watching, it appeared final. Maggie Carter had been choked into silence by her own blood, her own family left breathless on the living room floor with no ally. No justice, only the echo of a brother's greed. When I was a little girl, My earliest memory of my brother Thomas was not one of kindness, but of control. He was older by 8 years, tall and loud even as a teenager, and my mother Helen always rushed to his defense no matter what he did. If he broke a neighbor's window playing baseball, she told the neighbors he was just a spirited boy. If he mocked me for spilling milk at the table, she laughed nervously and said I should toughen up. My father had died when I was 6, leaving my mother to hold the family together. But instead of balance, she built her world around my brother, granting him leeway for every mistake, while quietly expecting me to absorb the weight of responsibility. By the time I was 10, I knew exactly what my role was. I was the quiet one, the helper, the extra mouth that should not ask for much. Thomas, meanwhile, was the golden son. He strutted through our small town like he owned it, bragging about how he would inherit everything our parents had worked for. Our mother never contradicted him. She repeated to me in hushed tones that boys needed encouragement, that Thomas would someday carry the Carter name, while I should focus on being supportive, obedient, and invisible. I hated those words, though. I swallowed them like bitter medicine. As the years passed, Thomas grew bolder, his temper sharper. By 15, he was drinking, sneaking out, coming home with the sour stench of beer. Mother would scold him gently, then turn to me with desperate eyes and whisper, "Don't upset him, Maggie. He's just under pressure." Pressure from what I never understood, because Thomas never worked, never studied, never contributed. He coasted on excuses while I cooked dinners, cleaned the house, and made sure the bills my father's insurance had once covered were filed on time. Mother leaned on me for stability, but gave all her loyalty to him. That contradiction twisted inside me a knot of duty and resentment. When I turned 18, I thought things might change. I earned a scholarship to a small college nearby and took a job as a junior accountant to cover expenses. I believed independence would earn respect, but Thomas laughed in my face. "Who needs your little numbers job when Mom's property will take care of me forever?" he sneered. The sting of his contempt cut deeper than the hours I poured into balancing ledgers late at night. Mother, instead of defending me, urged me not to provoke him. "Thomas is fragile," she said, as if my very existence was a threat to his ego. I learned quickly that my success was seen as defiance, and defiance would not be tolerated. The first time he struck me was a summer evening when I refused to give him money. He had lost hundreds at a poker game, and when I said no, his palm cracked across my face. The shock of it burned worse than the pain. I looked to Mother expecting outrage, but she wrung her hands and whispered, "Please, Maggie, just give him what he needs." Her silence was permission. That night, as I pressed a cold cloth to my swollen cheek, I realized the rules of our household had been rewritten. Thomas was untouchable, and I was disposable. In the years that followed, his cruelty escalated. He kicked doors when he lost at gambling, punched holes in walls, and hurled plates across the kitchen if dinner was not to his liking. Sometimes he cornered me in the hallway, leaning close with that drunken reek, telling me no man would ever want me, that I was destined to be alone. He enjoyed watching me shrink, and Mother pretended not to see. She was tired, weary from decades of submission, and her answer to every outburst was to look at the floor and hope it would pass. I began writing secret journals, pouring into them every insult, every bruise, every moment I felt erased. Those notebooks became my only refuge, the proof that I existed beyond Thomas's narrative. I would sit at night with a lamp turned low, recording dates and details in neat handwriting, telling myself that words had weight even if no one listened now. Still, I longed for someone to notice. Our neighbor Ruth, an elderly widow with sharp eyes, sometimes asked me if everything was all right. She noticed the way I held my arm stiffly after Thomas shoved me into a doorframe, or the way makeup barely covered the swelling on my cheek. I always lied embarrassed and afraid, saying I was clumsy, that I had tripped. But her gaze told me she did not believe me. Her silence was heavy, but not cruel. It was the silence of someone waiting for me to speak first. By the time I reached my late 20s, Thomas was a man in years, but a child in responsibility. He married Clara, a woman with a sharp tongue and sharper eyes, who seemed to take pleasure in echoing his contempt. Together they became a team of tormentors. If Thomas barked, Clara smirked. If Thomas struck, Clara filmed. They thrived on humiliation, and Mother Old and frail still clung to her pattern of denial. "Don't start arguments," she whispered to me as though I was the one igniting his rage. When Mother's health began to fail, I hoped she would finally see the truth. But instead, she leaned harder on Thomas, believing his empty promises that he would care for her. He manipulated her with gifts he bought using money he stole with fake tenderness that vanished once her eyes closed. I cared for her quietly, cooking soups, managing her medications, ensuring her bills were paid. Thomas would burst into the house demanding money, screaming about debts, and Mother would turn to me, not him, to make it right. I shouldered the burden while he reaped the favor. And then, when she passed away, everything unraveled. Her death left behind more than grief. It left a house, land, and savings Thomas believed were his by birthright. The will, he insisted, was just a formality. He told anyone who would listen that Mother had always wanted him to have everything, that I was just a hanger-on. His arrogance grew with every passing day, and I knew conflict was inevitable. Yet even as fear coiled tighter inside me, a different resolve began to take shape. I was tired of silence, tired of being erased. I began to scan copies of every document I could find, locking the originals in a safety deposit box under my name. I carried a small recorder in my purse, hidden, capturing his drunken rants. I hid USB drives inside hollowed books, each one a tiny fortress of truth. They were my insurance, my rebellion stitched quietly into the fabric of daily life. These were not grand gestures, not battles fought with fists, but they were mine, and they gave me the strength to believe that one day his cruelty would not stand unchallenged. And still, Thomas circled me like a predator, sensing weakness, mocking my precautions, rifling through my things, snarling that I would never escape his control. He had no idea that while he tried to break me, I was building a case that would eventually break him. The weeks after my mother's funeral felt like walking through a minefield. Every corner of the old house carried her absence, yet Thomas prowled the halls as if he owned them, puffed up with entitlement, his voice echoing that everything in sight was his by right. He waved empty whiskey bottles like trophies, declaring that Mom had promised him the land, the savings, the furniture, every last item down to the silverware. I knew better. I had seen the will tucked into her desk drawer weeks before she died, and I had already made copies. It split the inheritance evenly between us, a rare act of fairness from a woman who had spent her life shielding him. But to Thomas, fairness was an insult. He wanted all of it, and he was willing to crush me to get it. The first confrontation came only days after the burial. We sat at the kitchen table, the will placed between us, and his face darkened as he read the words. "Half, half, for you." He slammed his fist down so hard the wood cracked. "You don't deserve a damn thing, Maggie. You've been nothing but a parasite." Clara leaned in from the doorway, her phone already in her hand, recording his rage with a smile that chilled me. Her nails tapped the case rhythmically like she was enjoying a show. I tried to answer calmly to say that this was Mom's decision, not mine, but the words barely left my mouth before Thomas lunged across the table, his hand striking me across the face. Pain bloomed, my vision blurred, and Clara laughed softly. I staggered back, holding the bruise forming on my cheek, and whispered, "Stop." His grin widened. "You think you can stop me? You'll hand it all over or you'll regret it." From that moment, every day became a test of endurance. He rifled through my purse when I left it unattended, searching for documents. He smashed a photo of our father in a drunken rage, shouting that I was trying to rewrite family history. He cornered me in the hallway at night, his breath heavy with liquor, snarling threats about what he would do if I defied him. Clara played her part perfectly, taunting me with sly remarks, recording my humiliation, never intervening. Together, they created a theater of torment, and I was the unwilling star. But beneath my silence, I was not passive. Every threat he shouted, every insult he hurled, I recorded. I slipped my phone into my pocket, pressing record whenever he began his tirades. I wrote everything down in my journal, noting dates and times. I hid the USB drives under the lining of my suitcase, inside the hollow spine of an old Bible, in the pocket of a coat I never wore. I became meticulous, disciplined, patient. These were my weapons, though he never noticed. The violence escalated. One night when I refused to sign a document he had forged to transfer the deed into his name, he slammed me against the wall so hard I felt my ribs crack. I slid down the plaster, gasping, clutching my side while Clara filmed from the corner. My vision pulsed with pain, but I forced myself to memorize every detail, every word he shouted, knowing it would matter later. Another evening, he accused me of stealing money from his wallet. He grabbed my arm, twisting it until I screamed, then shoved me down onto the floor. The carpet burned my skin as I crawled away. But he loomed over me, spitting venom. "You think you can outsmart me?" "You're nothing, nothing." Clara's laughter echoed and my humiliation burned hotter than the bruises. Still, I kept my silence. Outwardly, I obeyed, nodded, avoided confrontation. Inwardly, I was collecting his downfall piece by piece. My neighbors began to notice. Ruth, the elderly widow next door, heard shouting through the thin walls and knocked one evening with a plate of cookies. Thomas sneered at her, slammed the door in her face, but not before she glimpsed the swelling on my cheek. She met my eyes with a silent question, but I could only lower my gaze, unwilling to risk Thomas's wrath. Yet that moment planted a seed. I was not as invisible as he wanted me to believe. The turning point came when Thomas discovered one of my journals. I had been careless, leaving it beneath my pillow, and he stormed into my room, waving the notebook like a weapon. His face twisted with triumph as he read aloud my words, mocking my careful notes. He tore pages out, crumpling them, shouting that I was a liar, that no one would believe me. Then he struck me again, the sting of his palm cracking across my face. I curled inward, but as he threw the notebook into the trash, he failed to see the tiny recorder tucked into the spine. I retrieved it later, trembling, but elated. It had captured everything: his rage, his blows, his threats. It was the most damning piece of evidence yet. Still, he grew more paranoid. He began demanding to see my phone, rifling through my belongings, accusing me of plotting against him. He locked documents in his own drawer, keeping the keys around his neck. Clara fed his paranoia, whispering lies that I was contacting lawyers, that I was planning to steal his inheritance. They circled me like predators, their suspicion tightening the noose, but I did not stop. I only became more careful. The night it all came to a head began deceptively ordinary. The air outside was heavy with humidity, the cicadas screaming in the trees. I was in the living room reading quietly when Thomas burst in, a letter crumpled in his fist. He had found the scholarship acceptance I had received for a professional course at work, a small chance at advancing my career. His face burned with fury. "You dare to make plans without me!" he roared, slamming the letter onto the table. Clara appeared instantly, phone raised, eyes gleaming. I stood slowly, my heart pounding. "It's mine, Thomas. I earned it." The words barely left my lips before his hand struck me, sending me sprawling across the coffee table. Wood-splintered pain shot through my shoulder and my chest tightened with terror. He kicked me, his boot slamming into my ribs, and the air whooshed from my lungs. "Respect," he shouted. "Respect is what you owe me." I curled into myself, choking my heart, hammering into chaos. Clara narrated softly into her phone like it was a spectacle, a private show for her amusement. My body trembled, but I forced my hand under the couch, feeling for the USB drive I had hidden there. My fingers brushed against it, and I pushed it deeper out of sight, praying he would not notice. If I did not survive the night, maybe someone would. The violence stretched on my breaths, shallow and ragged, my vision blurred. Somewhere beyond the haze, I heard a knock at the door. Ruth's voice carried through the wood. "Is everything all right in there?" Thomas cursed, snarling at Clara to send her away. Clara darted to the door, lying smoothly, saying we were just arguing over bills. Ruth's voice was suspicious, but she eventually retreated. My body sagged, pain radiating from every limb. But my mind clung to that sound. Someone had heard, someone cared. When Thomas dragged me back to my room, I locked the door behind me as soon as I could and collapsed onto the floor. My chest heaved, my body screamed with pain, but I crawled beneath the bed, pulled out my hidden recorder, and pressed record. My voice was faint, broken but clear enough. "Today, Thomas attacked me again. He found the letter. He will kill me if I do not stop him." Then I hid the device deep inside my backpack, my trembling hands clutching it like a lifeline. Outside, his fists pounded against the door, his threats echoing through the house, Clara's laughter weaving between his rage. I lay there in the dark, tasting blood, my breath ragged, but my resolve hardening. This could not go on forever. Either he would destroy me, or I would destroy his lies. When I woke, the ceiling above me was not the cracked plaster of my childhood home, but the sterile white tiles of a hospital room. The faint hum of machines surrounded me, their blinking lights tethered to my wrist and chest. My throat ached raw, every swallow burning, as though Thomas's fingers still pressed there. A nurse leaned over her eyes, sympathetic, telling me I had stopped breathing for nearly a minute, that a neighbor had called emergency services after hearing shouting and silence that stretched too long. "Lucky," she said, "you're very lucky." I closed my eyes, and tears slid down my temples. Lucky was not what I felt. I felt cornered like a mouse that had escaped the trap only because the predator was too drunk to finish the kill. Thomas would come again, and next time there would be no luck. The door creaked open, and to my shock, it was not Thomas or Clara, but Mr. Harris, my mother's old lawyer. He was a tall man with thinning gray hair, a stack of folders under one arm. He looked at me with a mix of sorrow and determination. "Maggie," he said softly, "your mother left more than a will. She left instruction safeguards." I found my throat too sore to answer, so he continued. "She had suspected Thomas's temper, and she asked me to keep a copy of her will along with notes clarifying her intentions." His words pierced through the haze of pain. For the first time in weeks, I felt the faint stir of hope. I was not alone in this fight. Harris placed a hand on my arm gently. "I will testify," he said, "and you must protect yourself. Do you have anything, documents, recordings?" My mind raced, thinking of the USB drives hidden in books, the recorder in my backpack. I nodded weakly. "Good," he said. "Keep them safe. They may be the difference between freedom and silence." After he left, another knock came at the door. Ruth, my neighbor, stepped in hesitantly, carrying a small bouquet of daisies from her garden. She looked older than I remembered, her face lined with concern. She saw the bruises circling my neck, the swelling on my cheek, and her lips tightened. I heard everything she whispered. I've heard it for years. I should have spoken sooner. I wanted to sob, to collapse into her arms, but all I managed was a faint nod. She squeezed my hand, her grip firm despite her age. "You're not alone anymore. If the police ask, I will tell them what I've seen, what I've heard." Her words settled deep inside me, stronger than morphine, stronger than any medicine. Someone had witnessed. Someone was willing to speak. That evening, Officer Daniels appeared, a young man with sharp eyes and a notebook in hand. He asked questions, carefully glancing at my injuries, jotting notes. I hesitated, fear clogging my throat, but then I remembered Harris's advice, Ruth's promise. I told Daniels pieces of the truth, that Thomas had grown violent, that he had threatened me, that Clara filmed it all. I did not tell him everything yet, not about the recordings, not about the USB drives, but his steady gaze and the way he said, "We can help you. If you help us," planted a seed of trust. When he left, I felt the shape of a plan forming. Back at the house after I was discharged, the danger remained. Thomas prowled. Clara smirked, but I carried my backpack everywhere, the recorder tucked inside, capturing his outbursts. Each night, I added to my journal dates and times scrawled in neat lines. I hid memory cards inside hollowed books, folded notes beneath mattress seams, locked copies in Ruth's mailbox when she wasn't looking. Every act of hiding was an act of rebellion. Clara taunted me, saying, "No one will ever believe you. You're weak." But I smiled faintly behind closed lips, because I knew belief did not matter as much as proof. Proof would speak louder than my bruises. Days later, Thomas stormed into the kitchen, waving a forged document demanding I sign over my share. When I refused, he hurled a glass across the room, shattering it against the wall. I flinched, but my hand pressed the record button in my pocket. His voice thundered. Clara's laughter echoed, and the evidence grew. Each file became a weapon. Each journal entry, a bullet in a gun I had not yet fired. I moved with deliberate calm, feigning submission, while building an arsenal of truth. Late at night, when silence returned, I stared at my bruises in the mirror and whispered to myself, "If I do not fight back, they will kill me." And for the first time, the reflection staring back at me did not look broken. It looked ready. The courthouse smelled of dust and old wood, the kind of scent that clings to places where secrets are dragged into the light. I sat at the long oak table, my hands trembling, but steady enough to clutch the folder Harris had prepared. Across from me sat Thomas, shoulders square, jaw tight, his eyes full of venom. Clara hovered beside him, her phone clutched like a talisman, though this time the smirk on her lips looked brittle. The judge entered, a stern woman with sharp eyes, and the room hushed. This was not just a hearing about the estate. It was the battleground where years of silence would either crumble or harden into chains. Harris spoke first, his voice calm but firm. Your Honor, this case concerns not only the distribution of assets, but the safety of my client. He gestured toward me, and I felt every eye in the room shift. Thomas slammed his fist on the table. Safety! She's lying! She has been lying her whole life. My mother wanted me to have everything. Maggie's nothing but a leech. His voice rose echoing against the paneled walls. The judge lifted a brow. Mr. Carter, control yourself. But Thomas was already spiraling, pointing at me with a shaking hand. She forged documents. She's trying to steal from me. I clenched my jaw, forcing my body to stay still, to stay quiet. Remembering Harris's advice, let him expose himself. Clara leaned close to Thomas, whispering, egging him on, and I saw the madness flicker in his eyes. Then Harris opened the folder and pulled out the certified copy of my mother's will, signed and dated, clearly dividing the estate equally. The judge studied it, nodding once. It appears valid. Thomas's face darkened. Lies, all of it. Mom told me everything was mine. Harris's voice did not waver. Then why, Mr. Carter, do we have this? He slid a small USB drive across the table. My pulse hammered. The judge allowed it to be played, and the courtroom filled with the unmistakable sound of Thomas's voice, recorded in his drunken rage. The money is mine, you don't deserve a damn thing. If you don't give it to me, I'll make sure you regret it. The recording continued, his threats clear. Clara's laughter audible in the background. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The judge's face hardened. Mr. Carter! Do you deny this is your voice? Thomas stammered, his skin blotchy red. That's out of context. She provoked me. She always provokes me. Harris pressed further. And this, Your Honor. He played another clip the night Thomas slammed me into the wall, his snarling threats captured in chilling clarity. I sat frozen, every bruise relived in my mind, but also every ounce of power I had reclaimed surging through me. Clara's voice rang out on the recording, too, her taunts unmistakable. The judge turned sharply. Mrs. Carter, is this you encouraging the violence? Clara's smirk shattered. That's not what it sounds like. But the video Harris presented next left no room for denial. Footage taken from Clara's own phone, which I had copied when she carelessly left it charging, showed Thomas's hands on my throat, my face turning pale, my body collapsing. Clara's voice laughed faintly behind the camera. The silence in the courtroom was suffocating. The judge leaned back slowly. I have seen enough. Thomas exploded, surging to his feet. She's lying. She's framing me. You don't understand. His voice cracked desperation, seeping through rage. He pounded the table and two bailiffs stepped forward. Sit down, sir, one ordered. But Thomas lunged toward me, his hand outstretched, his face twisted with the same hatred that had nearly ended my life. Before he could reach me, the bailiff seized him, twisting his arms behind his back, and the cold clink of handcuffs snapped through the chamber. The judge's gavel struck like thunder. Mr. Carter, you are under arrest for assault, attempted murder, and contempt of court. Clara shrieked, tears streaking her face, but the judge's eyes cut through her. You too will face investigation for complicity. The room buzzed with whispers, reporters, scribbling spectators shaking their heads. For years, Thomas had ruled with fear in the privacy of our home. Now, his empire of intimidation crumbled in public view. He shouted curses as the bailiffs dragged him out, his voice no longer powerful, just pathetic echoes bouncing off courthouse walls. Clara slumped into her chair, her phone slipping from her grasp, the smirk gone replaced by dread. The judge turned to me. Ms. Carter, your courage in preserving this evidence has not gone unnoticed. You have the full protection of the law. My throat tightened, tears pricking my eyes, but I forced myself to nod, my voice steady despite the tremor inside me. Thank you, Your Honor. In that moment, as Thomas was led away in cuffs, and Clara sat trembling, I felt the years of silence crack and fall away like broken chains. The courtroom, once intimidating, now felt like a sanctuary where truth had finally spoken louder than fists. I was not invisible anymore. I was heard, I was believed, and justice had begun. The courthouse emptied slowly, murmurs lingering in the air long after Thomas had been dragged away. I sat frozen, my heart still racing. The imprint of his attempt to lunge at me burned into my nerves. Harris gathered the folders calmly, his steady presence a reminder that this was only the beginning of a longer fight, but also the end of years of silence. Outside, the sun struck bright against the courthouse steps, and reporters swarmed cameras, flashing voices rising with questions about the brother who tried to strangle his sister over an inheritance. For once, the story was not hidden behind the walls of our home. It was public, undeniable, irreversible. Days later, I received official confirmation Thomas was being held without bail, charged with attempted murder, aggravated assault, and fraud. The weight of the charges pressed down like a gavel itself. He had spent years boasting he was untouchable, that he owned the house, the family, the narrative. Now he sat in a concrete cell, reduced to another case file in a system he could no longer manipulate. Clara's downfall came swiftly after. Investigators seized her phone, recovering hours of footage where she had laughed, taunted, and filmed instead of intervening. What she had thought was entertainment became evidence of complicity. She faced charges of aiding and abetting assault. And though she tried to play the victim, the recordings betrayed her cruelty. Her family, once so eager to bask in Thomas's bravado, cut her off entirely, ashamed to be tied to the scandal. I heard whispers that she moved back in with her parents, ostracized, her reputation in shreds. For me, the consequences felt quieter, but heavier in their relief. The court upheld the original will, granting me my rightful half of the estate. The house, the land, the savings, no longer weapons Thomas could hold over me, were secured legally in my name. I walked through the hallways of our childhood home with a strange mixture of grief and liberation. Every corner held memories of violence, yet also the possibility of rebuilding. Harris assured me that restraining orders and legal protections would ensure Thomas could not reach me again, even if he were someday released. Officer Daniels visited once more, his voice steady as he promised the department would keep watch, that Ruth's testimony had been invaluable, that my own courage had turned the tide. And Ruth herself stood on my porch one evening, her arms folded, her gaze fierce despite her age. "You did it, Maggie," she said simply. "You fought back. For years I had been the ghost in my own life, erased by Thomas's rage and Clara's mockery. Now the consequences were carved into reality, prison bars for him, shame for her, freedom for me." In the weeks after the trial, the bruises on my skin faded, but the scars inside pulsed with memory. I walked through the house my mother once filled with warmth, and heard echoes of shouting, the slam of fists, the sound of Clara's laughter. At first, every creak of the floorboards made me flinch. Every shadow across the wall reminded me of Thomas's looming presence. But slowly, I began to reclaim the space. I opened the curtains wide, letting sunlight spill into rooms that had long been dim. I planted roses in the yard, the kind my mother loved, their bright petals pushing defiantly against the soil, as if to remind me that beauty could still grow here. I installed security cameras around the property, the quiet hum of their lenses, a comfort, not a cage. They were not symbols of fear, but of strength, a reminder that I would never again live unprotected. I set up my desk by the window and began to write again, not just journals for evidence, but words meant to reach others. I started a blog called Silent No More, where I shared fragments of my story, the manipulation, the bruises, the small acts of resistance that eventually built a wall strong enough to topple a tyrant, To my surprise, people responded. Messages poured in from women and men across the country, many older than me who whispered their own secrets into the comment box of brothers who stole husbands, who shouted children, who turned cruel. They wrote of silence, of shame, of the feeling that no one would believe them. And they thanked me for proving that quiet resistance carefully gathered could turn into undeniable truth. Reading their words stitched something back together inside me. I was no longer a victim hiding bruises in the dark. I was a survivor lending my voice to others. Ethan, a colleague from work who had once quietly admired my persistence, stopped by one afternoon with groceries and a nervous smile. He did not push, did not pry, only sat with me on the porch as we watched the sun sink over the fields. For the first time in years, I felt what gentleness could be when it was not followed by cruelty. Whether friendship or something more, it reminded me that not all connections end in betrayal. Ruth came often bringing her garden vegetables sitting at my table, like the mother I wished I had known, firm, honest, unwilling to excuse abuse. Sometimes we spoke, sometimes we sat in silence, but her presence steadied me. She told me one evening, "You gave me courage too, Maggie. Watching you fight back even when you were terrified made me believe it's never too late to stand up." Her words sank deep, and I realized healing was not just personal, it was collective. The cycle of silence breaks when one person speaks. As months passed, Thomas's trial concluded with a long sentence years behind bars where his rage could no longer touch me. Clara accepted a plea deal her complicity marked on her record forever. Their names, once thunder in my ears, became distant, reduced to court documents and news clippings. They no longer dictated the rhythm of my days. On a cool spring morning, I stood in the garden, the roses in bloom, the air crisp with new beginnings. I thought of the night when Thomas's hands closed around my throat, when my breath stopped, when I believed my story would end in silence. But it had not ended there. That moment became the fracture where light seeped in the catalyst that pushed me from victim to survivor, from silence to voice. To anyone watching from the outside, it may have seemed impossible that someone like me could fight back. But I had not with fists or shouting, but with small, deliberate choices, pressing record writing in journals, tucking evidence into hidden places, refusing to let the truth be erased. Those quiet acts became louder than his rage, louder than his threats. They became the bridge to justice. If there is one message I carry forward, it is this: silence may feel safer, but it is a slow suffocation. Every bruise hidden, every insult swallowed, every secret carried alone builds a cage. But evidence allies, and even the smallest acts of defiance, can become keys. I stopped breathing that night, but I learned to live afterward, not for Thomas, not for fear, but for myself. And if my story reaches even one person sitting in their kitchen tonight, afraid to speak, then let it be this: you are not powerless. You are not invisible. Your words have weight, and one day they can set you free.